How does a top school decide who to admit? This is kind of the biggest question on everyone's mind as they're trying to get into a top school. How do they make the decision? Well, there's two answers I'm going to pose to you. Number one is deciding who is good enough, and number two is how is the decision made? Is there one person looking at your application? Is there two people looking at your application? What standard do they compare to? How do they decide if you're good enough? So we're going to get into both of those aspects. If you don't know who I am, my name is Meek. I own meekextrahelp.com, and every year I counsel students to an Ivy League admission. So you've heard me hit on this theme in every video I've made, is that to get into a top school, to get into the top 20, the top 10, the Ivy League, you need to stand out. Okay, we've covered examples of standing out in other videos. We've covered how to stand out in other videos. You'll find them linked up above. You'll find them linked in the description. Go check them out if you have the time. Okay, so I'm going to do a very brief overview here, and if you want to learn more, you can watch the other videos. So standing out means you need to have something on your application that no one else has, or that very few other people have. Okay? Standing out means you have something called a wow factor. Wow factor, very simply, is something that when the admissions officer sees it on your application, they say, wow. Now let's put this in context of the type of applicants that top universities see, because you are getting some pretty stiff competition here. You're competing against valedictorians, you're competing against workaholics, you're competing with the top 5 kids from every high school in the nation and from high schools abroad. Okay? So briefly, how to stand out is not by academics. You can't stand out in academics unless you do something very special, which we cover with all our clients and I think we talked about in a different video. When you look at academics, academics has 3 categories. Category 1, Category 2, Category 3 is your GPA, your test scores, and your course rigor. Okay? In order to get your application considered, you need to have top 1% in the academics category. Okay? You need to be taking the hardest classes you're offered. You need to be taking APs, you need to be taking honors classes, and you need to follow the hardest course path that is available to you in your high school. Okay? You need to have test scores 1560 plus SAT, 35 plus ACT. You need to have a 4.0 GPA, 97, 98 plus. And that's what you need to get considered. Okay? And you need to have other wow factors elsewhere on your application. These could be in your extracurriculars, these could be in your essay, these could be you being a recruited athlete. Okay? Examples include things like inventing something, things like publishing a research paper, things like writing a book, things like being famous, things like having an Instagram account with over 1,000 followers where you post useful content that isn't just you on vacation and the food you eat and whatnot. Okay? So you need factors to stand out. If you want to watch our video on standing out, it's linked up above. So let's go through what actually happens on the other side when the admissions officer reads your application. What's going through their head? What are they thinking? What are they comparing you to? Okay? So the admissions officer sits down at their desk with 3,000 applications to read through, and they read through your application once. Okay? You only get to be read through by one officer. Only one set of eyes is going to get to look at your application. And so you need to impress that one person. You don't get a second chance. And so this officer is going to read through your application. They're going to take some notes. They're going to take notes on what they think is significant. Because keep in mind, they're reading through 3,000 applications. Okay? They're not going to remember anything in your application unless it's really fantastic. So they're going to keep notes and they're going to reference those notes later if they decide to. Okay? So be aware that your admissions officer might miss something in your application. Okay, they have 3,000 to read through. They're bored. They got a cup of coffee in hand. They're thinking about what they're having for dinner tonight. Okay, so it's important to write your application in a way that like slaps them in the face and wake them up. And we have videos on that. So one officer reads through your application. They take notes, and how it works is it's not they compare you to one standard. It's not that they select the best 4,000 applications in the pool. It's not that way at all. It's this one officer decides to select a handful of applications to go to something called committee. Okay? And what happens at committee is the committee is a room of 4 or 5 or 6 different admissions counselors, admissions people. One is the head of admissions. There are several other admissions counselors there. One is the head of extracurricular activities that decides if this student is going to be able to socialize well at the institution. They are important people who know how the university works and know who they want. Okay? So what happens is this one officer who initially found your application, who initially read through it, it is the job of this officer to go to committee and to convince these 5, 6, 7 people that you are a good admit. Okay? And after they do their presentation, they all vote, and it's by popular vote. If enough people are convinced, if you win more than half the people, you get admitted. Okay? So this comes into play when you write your application, when you structure your application, is you need to give this admissions officer ammunition. You need to give them numbers. You need to give them figures. You need to give them facts. You need to make it easy for them to convince the other 6 people in the room that you are a good fit for this university. Okay? They take into account legacy. They take into account if you're a first generation student. They take a lot of things into account. Affirmative action has a very big place here. So picture yourself as an admissions officer who needs to fight for your application, who needs to push through this committee in order to get you your admission. Okay? If it takes them 1,000 words to explain who you are and why you should get admitted, they might run out of time. The other people at committee are also bored. They're also thinking about what they're going to have for dinner tonight. So it would be best if you could make it easy for this officer by giving them quick snippets of information. For example, describing how you are a very talented academic and you do all your work very diligently and you work very hard. That's not news to them. Okay? If you give them the 4-word sentence of he wrote a patent, that perks people's ears up. Okay? That's why standing out is so important. Is not only do you need to stand out to the guy who has 25, 30 minutes to read through your application, you also need to stand out to the group of 5 or 6 or 7 people who have maybe 5 minutes to listen to this guy lecture about your application. Okay? So you need to be able to stand out in a few words. Describe what you did, who you are, where you come from. Make it easy for this guy to convince people that you are unique, that you are a standout person in few words. So that's a great lesson for how you should be writing your supplemental essays, for how you should be describing the activities in your activity section, for how you should be describing your awards. You want to describe it and convey as much meaning as possible, as much uniqueness as possible in as few words as you can. Okay? So that's my final tip to you guys. If you want help at all running through your application, we have a Discord server where you can come ask us questions. You can go to meekextrahelp.com and book college counseling. Anyway, I hope you learned something very valuable from this video. Have a fantastic day.